I've been staring at this draft for 3 days now, trying to figure out where to even start. Every time I open a new tab and put my fingers on the keyboard, I end up just sitting there with the cursor blinking at me like it's waiting for me to say something I'm not ready to say. But I think I need to get this out. I think writing it down is the only thing left I can actually do, because the other options, talking to someone in person, calling a professional, going back to that apartment, none of those feel like real options anymore. So here it is. I'm going to try to explain what happened to me between the 3rd week of September and the 12th of October of this year, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building on North Kedzie Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. I'm going to try to be as specific and as honest as I can, and I'm going to try not to editorialize too much, because every time I start adding my own interpretation to what I saw, I feel something cold move through the center of my chest and I have to stop. My name is Mark. I'm 31 years old. I'm a network infrastructure specialist for a mid-sized logistics company downtown, which is a complicated way of saying I sit in front of 3 monitors for 9 hours a day and make sure data moves from one place to another without breaking anything. I've been doing it for 6 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays well and it keeps my brain occupied, which is more than I can say for a lot of things. I moved to the Avondale neighborhood at the beginning of September after my lease in Wicker Park ended and my landlord raised the rent by $400 a month, which was not something I was prepared to absorb. The new place wasn't perfect, 2nd floor of a 3-flat, old building, the kind of place where you can hear the water move through the pipes in the walls, but it was mine, and it was quiet, and the landlord seemed like a reasonable person who answered texts within the day. The bedroom faced west, which meant I got afternoon light rather than morning light, and for someone who has always struggled to get going before 8, that felt like a gift. The first week was fine. I unpacked slowly the way I always do, living out of boxes longer than I should, getting takeout from the Thai place on Milwaukee Avenue 3 nights in a row because it was faster than figuring out where I'd put my pots. I set up my home workstation in the 2nd bedroom, monitors, docking station, the mechanical keyboard I've had since college, and started the adjustment of doing remote Fridays from a new space. The walls were painted a kind of warm off-white that I liked. The floors were original hardwood, dark and slightly uneven in places, with that satisfying density that old wood has when you walk on it. I remember thinking that whoever had lived there before me had taken good care of the place. There were small marks in the wood near the window where someone had probably had a plant stand for years, and the shade of fading around them told me the previous tenant had been there a long time. The tiredness started somewhere around the middle of the 2nd week. I want to be clear that at first I had an explanation for it. I'd been sleeping in a new space, my commute pattern had changed slightly, work was in the middle of a migration project that had everyone on the infrastructure team working an extra hour or 2 most days. I was going to bed at a reasonable hour, 10:30, 11 at the latest, and I was waking up at 7 feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Not groggy in the way that passes after coffee, but genuinely depleted, the way you feel after a flight that went through the night or after a bad fever breaks. There was a weight behind my eyes that didn't lift, and my coffee consumption went from 2 cups in the morning to 4 spread across the day, and even then I was dragging by 3 in the afternoon. My manager, a patient man named Derek who runs our team with a measured calm I've always admired, asked me twice in the same week if I was getting enough sleep. I told him I was adjusting to a new place. He nodded and didn't push it. I was grateful for that at the time. The sound started on a Thursday night near the end of September. I was almost asleep, that soft threshold between consciousness and not, when I heard it. A dry, irregular scratching. It came from the direction of the bedroom floor, though the exact location was hard to pin down, the way sounds in old buildings tend to travel through the bones of the structure and arrive at you from unexpected angles. I lay still and listened. It was rhythmic in a way that was not quite regular, not the steady scrape of something mechanical, but something more organic. Something with a slight hitch to it, like a branch dragged across pavement by uneven wind. Scratch. Pause. Scratch scratch. Longer pause. Scratch. I told myself it was mice. Old building, September, the cold starting to come in at night. This was exactly when mice moved into walls. I knew that. I made a mental note to ask my landlord about it in the morning, and I pulled the blanket up and eventually I went to sleep. But I didn't sleep well. That I'm certain of, even though I have no specific memory of waking. I just know that when the alarm went off at 7 I surfaced from somewhere much deeper than normal, somewhere I'd been for a long time without moving, and I had the specific and disorienting sensation that I was returning from somewhere rather than simply waking up. I texted the landlord, a man named Phil, 50s, soft-spoken, the kind of person who wears the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, and he came by that Saturday to check the baseboards and the space under the kitchen cabinets. He didn't find anything. No droppings, no evidence of entry points, no gnaw marks on anything. He was thorough about it, moving the refrigerator out from the wall and crouching down with a flashlight, doing the same with the stove. He told me that the building was old enough that sounds in the pipes and in the structural elements were common and that he'd had other tenants report similar things. He said it in the particular way that people say things when they're hoping you'll accept the explanation without requiring any further specifics. I accepted it. He recaulked a gap along the baseboard near the bedroom window anyway, and I thanked him, and he left. That night the scratching was back. If anything, slightly louder. Over the following week I developed a routine of listening for it. Not deliberately, I wasn't lying in the dark waiting, but I noticed that I had begun to track it the way you track any recurring background noise once your brain has catalogued it as potentially meaningful. It always seemed to come from the same general area of the room, the far left corner, the one that sat diagonal from the foot of my bed, the one where the ceiling met 2 walls at a place where the plaster had developed a fine network of cracks that I assumed was just settling. I never heard it during the day. It was always at night, always after I'd turned the lights off, and always with that same quality, dry, uneven, patient. The word patient is wrong, I know that. Sounds don't have patience. But I'm trying to be honest about the impression it gave me, and that's the word that kept coming up in my head when I thought about it. Patient. By the 1st of October my tiredness had crossed into something I could only describe as systemic. My hands felt slightly clumsy. I was making small errors at work, nothing serious, nothing that caused an outage or got flagged by QA, but the kind of small misconfigurations and typos that I simply didn't make, normally. I caught most of them in review. Derek noticed one that I didn't and sent me a Slack message that was carefully worded and kind but that I understood to mean, something is off with you, and I'm starting to pay attention. I went to bed at 10 that night and took 2 Benadryl, which I almost never do, and I told myself that I was going to get ahead of this, that one full night of solid, medicated sleep would reset whatever was off in my system. I fell asleep fast. The scratching didn't wake me, if it happened at all. The camera was my friend Jess's idea. Jess is a software engineer who lives in Pilsen and who approaches every problem in her life with the same methodical pragmatism she applies to debugging code. I told her about the scratching over drinks one Friday, and she'd immediately asked whether I had any surveillance equipment, and when I said no she gave me the look she gives people when they've done something she considers slightly irrational, and then told me to just set up a camera. She had an old Wise camera she wasn't using, the kind that does motion-triggered recording and has decent low-light performance. She offered to drop it off, and I told her not to worry about it, I'd just order one, and I did, a slightly nicer model with a wider angle and better night vision, off Amazon, 2-day shipping. It arrived on a Wednesday. I set it up that evening, positioned on top of the dresser facing the bed, angled so it captured the corner as well as most of the mattress. I set the sensitivity to medium and enabled the motion alert. Then I went to bed, feeling the particular mixture of vindication and slight self-consciousness that comes from taking a problem seriously enough to actually do something about it. I was certain the recording would show me something, a mouse running along the baseboard, the shadow of a branch from outside casting movement across the floor, anything. I was going to figure this out, name it, and be done with it. I woke up the next morning at 7 and checked the app before I even got out of bed. There were 3 motion events flagged. The first was at 11:48 p.m., which turned out to be me rolling over in my sleep. The second was at 2:30 a.m., same thing. The third was at 3:17 a.m., and this is where I need to slow down and try to describe exactly what I saw, because I've watched this clip probably 60 or 70 times since then and I still don't have words adequate to the experience of seeing it the first time. At 3:17 a.m., I sat up in bed. Not the way a person sits up when they're startled awake, not a gradual surfacing, not a groggy fumble toward the side of the mattress. I sat up in one clean, vertical movement, like something hinged at my hips had been pulled from above. Straight up, fast, as if it required no muscular effort at all. My eyes opened at the same moment. I could see this clearly in the night vision footage, the bright, flat gleam of open eyes in the grayscale image. But the eyes were wrong. Even in the washed-out green-gray palette of night vision there was something wrong about them. They were open too wide and they were still. Not the quick refocusing of eyes that have just woken, just open, and fixed. I watched myself on the recording turn my head to the left, toward the far corner, the one I'd been hearing the scratching from. The movement of my head was slow and smooth in a way that reminded me of something mechanical, something operating on a track. And then I just sat there. Upright, eyes open, head turned toward the corner. The timestamp in the corner of the recording counted forward. 3:17, 3:18. 3:19, I was not moving. Not the normal small motions of a conscious person, no adjusting, no blinking that I could make out, no shift of weight. At 3:24, I lay back down. Same way I'd sat up, one motion, smooth, no hesitation. And then I was still, and the recording showed nothing else until my alarm at 7. I went back through the audio track carefully, because the app allowed for it. And there, underneath the ambient noise of the building, the pipes, the distant hiss of traffic on Kedzie, there was the scratching. Louder than I'd heard it consciously before. Clearer. It started about 40 seconds before I sat up and it continued throughout the 7 minutes I was sitting there, and it stopped, abruptly, the exact moment I lay back down. I sat in my kitchen with my coffee and I did not drink the coffee. I watched the clip again. I looked at the timestamp, 3:17, 7 minutes, 3:24, and I thought about calling someone and then I thought about what I would say and I didn't call anyone. I told myself, sleep disorder. Parasomnia. Non-REM arousal disorder, the kind where people do strange things, walk, talk, sit up and stare, without ever actually waking. I'd read about it at some point. It was real, it was documented, it happened to people. The sound was probably my brain working it into the experience somehow, a real ambient noise becoming integrated into whatever state I was in. This was the explanation and the explanation was sufficient and I was going to call a doctor. I didn't call a doctor. What I did instead was not sleep for most of the next 2 nights, lying in the dark and watching the corner of the room, and seeing nothing, and then eventually sleeping and waking at 7 feeling worse than before. On the 4th morning after finding the first recording, I made myself sit down and watch the footage from every night since I'd installed the camera. And I found the same event on every single night. Not always at exactly 3:17, sometimes 3:19, once at 3:14, but always somewhere in that window. Always the same motion, straight up, head to the corner, 7 minutes, back down. Always the scratching on the audio track, louder during those 7 minutes than at any other point in the night. It was on the 6th or 7th review of the footage, I was going frame by frame, which the app allowed at lower resolution, that I noticed the eyes. I had to zoom in, and the image quality degraded significantly when I did, but I could see it, my pupils, in every clip, during the 7 minutes, were contracted. Small and tight. The night vision mode of the camera meant the room was being captured in near darkness, and the infrared illuminators that allowed the night vision to function should have caused my pupils to dilate in response to low light, not contract. Pupils contract when exposed to bright light. In every single recording, sitting in a dark room with my eyes open and fixed on a corner, my pupils looked like I was staring into the midday sun. I zoomed in on the corner itself in the same frames. Empty. Dark. The plaster with its network of fine cracks. Nothing else. It was on the same day I noticed the pupils that I went back and watched the mouth. I don't know why I hadn't seen it before, perhaps I'd been focused on the eyes, on the general strangeness of the posture, but once I saw it I couldn't unsee it. In the later recordings especially, in the higher resolution frames, I could see movement at my lips. Small and subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, but present, lips parting slightly, almost no movement, but enough. Enough to indicate that I was producing sound. I turned the audio up as high as the app would go and listened through earbuds and I could just barely hear it, not words, not that I could make out, just the faintest breath of vocalization, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed, if I'm being completely honest, like it was responding to something. Like it was answering the scratching. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom that night. I took my pillow and my blanket to the couch in the living room and I lay there in the orange glow from the streetlights and I thought about this very carefully and I decided that I needed more information before I did anything else. The decision to get more information rather than simply leave is one that I've thought about a great deal since then. I've tried to understand it. At the time it felt like reason, like the logical response of someone who was experiencing something that demanded to be understood before it demanded to be fled. Looking back I wonder if it was something else. I wonder if the decision was entirely mine. The second camera I ordered that night, one-day shipping, a different brand with a wider field of view. I set it up the following evening pointed directly at the corner. I angled the original camera slightly to better capture my face rather than just my upper body. Then I went to sleep on the couch, or tried to. I actually did sleep, eventually, more deeply than I had in weeks, which at the time I attributed to being out of the bedroom. That detail still bothers me. In the morning I checked the corner camera first. Motion event at 3:17. I opened it and watched. The corner was empty. Dark plaster, uneven floor, the slight curve where the baseboard met the wall. The timestamp ticked forward. And then, at 3:20, something happened to the wall. I want to be precise here because being precise is the only thing keeping me from simply not describing this at all. I did not see a figure. I did not see a face or a shape or anything with a body. What I saw was a shadow. Thin and tall, taller than the room, which made no spatial sense, originating from somewhere behind the plane of the wall and appearing to move through it rather than across it. It was the shadow of something elongated, with proportions that were not the proportions of any piece of furniture in the room, not the proportions of anything I could account for. It arrived gradually, the way ink disperses in water, spreading into existence rather than appearing, and it moved slowly toward the bed. Slowly, with that same quality I'd been calling patient in my head for weeks. It reached the foot of the bed at approximately 3:22. And on the original camera, the one pointed at my face, I watched myself begin to smile. I need to be careful about how I describe the smile. It was my face. My muscles. I know that. But the quality of it was wrong in a way that goes beyond what I can technically articulate. It was too large. Not grotesquely so, not the exaggerated grimace of a film, but wider than I smile, distributed differently across my face, involving muscles I don't think I normally use. And it held. For the remaining 2 minutes of the 7-minute window, the thing in the corner touching the foot of my bed and me with that smile on my face, it just held, unmoving and patient and completely unknown to me in the morning when I woke up feeling, for the first time in weeks, almost rested. I found the marks that same morning. I'd been in the apartment for over a month and I'd developed the habit of showering without looking in the mirror too carefully, the kind of mild self-neglect that comes with working from home and having nowhere to be. So it was only when I deliberately leaned in, after watching the recording, with a specific and cold intention to examine myself, that I saw them. Along my neck, following the line of my collarbone, a scattering of small gray marks. I thought at first they were bruises, but the color was wrong, too pale, too dry-looking, the gray of old ash or the dust from a construction site. I touched one with my finger and it smudged slightly, the way chalk smudges. I wet a cloth and rubbed one away and the skin beneath was normal. I couldn't identify a source. I hadn't been anywhere that would account for them and they weren't there the previous morning. I was certain of that because I'd had a rash from a new detergent the week before and I'd been checking the area daily. I called Jess that afternoon. I told her everything, from the first sound to the second camera to the shadow and the smile. I described the ash marks. There was a long silence on the other end and then she asked if I wanted to come stay at her place and I said not yet. She asked why and I said I didn't know, which was true. She told me that what I was describing sounded like sleep paralysis with hypnagogic hallucinations, which can apparently cause visual disturbances even on camera in the sense that the camera captures what it captures but the brain's interpretation of the recording can be colored by the anxiety state of the viewer. She said this gently and I knew she didn't entirely believe it even as she said it. She asked me to send her the clips and I said I would and I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I just couldn't make myself do it. The next 4 nights I spent on the couch. I checked the recordings every morning. The bedroom was empty while I was gone, the cameras showed nothing, no motion events at all, the corners undisturbed, the shadow absent. The scratching, which I'd been hearing in the living room through the wall, was fainter without me in the room. I thought, briefly, that this was it. That whatever it was had a geography, a specific zone, and that staying out of that zone was the solution. I thought about asking Phil if I could switch to the other bedroom arrangement, or even break the lease. I looked up early termination clauses. I researched sleep clinics on the north side that accepted my insurance. On the 5th night on the couch I woke up in the bedroom. I don't remember going in there. I was on the couch, I was asleep, and then I was in the bedroom, standing in the center of the room in the dark, facing the corner. I didn't know how long I'd been standing there. My feet were cold, the floor, in October, at whatever hour it was, and my arms were at my sides, and when I became aware of myself I became aware of all of it at once, the cold, the dark, the corner, and the sound. The scratching, right there with me, close enough that I understood for the first time that I'd been wrong about it coming from the walls. It was in the room. It had always been in the room. I turned the light on and the room was empty and the sound stopped. I checked the recording in the morning and found what I expected, myself walking in from the doorway at 3:12, standing in the center of the room for 4 minutes, then sitting on the edge of the bed and lying down at 3:16. The scratching on the audio, continuous and clear, louder than in any previous clip. And then, at 3:17, the event, sit up, corner, 7 minutes, smile, proceeded as normal. As if there were a schedule. As if there were a curriculum. That was 8 days ago. I haven't slept since, not properly, not more than an hour or 2 at a stretch, sitting up in the kitchen with every light in the apartment on. I've been surviving on energy drinks and the particular wired anxiety that comes from being too frightened to sleep and too exhausted to think clearly. I keep telling myself I'm going to leave, and I keep not leaving, and I'm trying to understand why, and every time I get close to understanding it I feel something shift in the back of my mind, something that isn't quite a thought, and then the understanding slides away. 3 nights ago I decided to try something. If I was going to sit up anyway, I thought, I could sit up with purpose. I would watch the bedroom on the camera app from the kitchen, in real time, and I would see what happened at 3:17 with my own eyes in real time rather than reviewing footage in the morning. I set up with my phone, volume low, and I watched. My bed was empty. The corner was empty. The room was quiet on camera and quiet around me. I watched the timestamp approach 3:17. At 3:17 I fell asleep. I know this because I came to at 3:24 with my face against the kitchen table and my phone on the floor where I'd dropped it. I picked it up. The recording from the bedroom showed nothing, an empty bed, an empty corner, no motion events. But the recording from the motion-triggered log showed one event. The camera in the bedroom, pointing at the empty bed, had logged a motion event beginning at 3:17 and ending at 3:24. Nothing visible in the footage. 7 minutes of empty room flagged by the motion sensor as containing movement. Last night was different. Last night I made it. I don't know how. I'd done 3 things of cold water on my face, I'd taken a caffeine pill at 2, I'd set a vibrating alarm on my phone for 3:15, but I made it. I was awake and watching at 3:17 and the bed was empty and the corner was empty and the timestamp moved forward and I was awake for all of it. For 6 minutes nothing happened and I watched and I waited and the minute counter moved and my hands were shaking and the scratching was just barely audible through the kitchen wall, dry and even and patient as it had always been. And then at the 6th minute, at 3:23, 1 minute before it always ended, on the phone screen, in the empty bedroom, I saw myself sitting on the edge of the bed. In the bedroom I was not physically in. Sitting there in the night vision gray with my eyes open, head turned toward the corner, and my lips moving. And the thing on the screen that was me, the thing sitting in the room where I was not sitting, slowly, in the last seconds of the 7th minute, turned its head and looked directly into the camera lens. I could see this clearly because the image was sharp, because the camera was good, because I had told myself I needed to see clearly. It looked into the lens and it raised one finger to its lips and it whispered something, and the audio track caught it this time, caught it clearly enough that there was no ambiguity, no interpretation required. 7 words. He allowed me to let him closer. And then the screen went dark, not the camera cutting out, just the image darkening, like something had stepped between the lens and whatever ambient light source was feeding it, and in the kitchen, sitting with my back against the wall and my phone in my hands, I felt something touch the back of my neck. Dry and warm, a pressure that was not quite a hand and was not quite not a hand, from behind me, from the wall I was pressing my back against, from the inside of the wall or from somewhere beyond the wall where nothing should be. Dry and warm and patient. I'm writing this from a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue. It's 9:15 in the morning. My laptop is charged and there are people around me and there is light. I've been sitting here for 2 hours and I'm going to stay here as long as they'll let me. I haven't gone back to the apartment. I don't have a plan beyond this table and this screen and the specific, cold quality of knowing that whatever I thought I was rationalizing for the past 6 weeks was never confused about me the way I was confused about it. The scratching, I understand now, wasn't asking me to find it. I think it knew where I was the entire time. I think the 7 minutes were not something happening to me. I think they were something being practiced. And I think the thing that touched the back of my neck in the kitchen last night was not warning me. I think it was finished with something, and I think that whatever it was finished with, I had been helping, and I think it took 6 weeks of nights because 6 weeks of nights was exactly how long it needed. My phone just buzzed. A motion alert from the bedroom camera. I opened the app. The bedroom is empty. The corner is empty. The timestamp says 9:22 a.m. The motion sensor has been running for 4 minutes and 20 seconds and it has not stopped.